What's up, Hippo lovers? Quarterfinals of T90's Titans League. The Viper against Yo in a best of 5. Those are the maps. This is the Civ draft, and we have the set because people on Twitter voted for it. So we are jumping into game number 1. Obviously the neutral map to start this one up. The Viper is playing Huns. Mr. Yo has Mongols. Mongols obviously crazy on this map because you have all this extra deer, should get quite an advantage in the resource income. Viper, pretty nice defensive map as well, though obviously both players with a long distance. Opening with a stable here. Mr. Yo then expands a bit more. Viper tries to wall off the top of the map, and well, obviously if you know your opponent is going for scouts, you add some spearmen. Both players going for the eco upgrades, and Viper managed to get some villager snipes here at the top. Well, Mr. Yo was chilling with the scouts, and those were here for quite some time. Didn't really find the effectiveness that Mr. Yo was looking for. It's going for some quick walls, not losing any further villagers, but struggling a bit here is Mr. Yo. The Viper runs around quite a bit, even manages to snipe one of those llamas here, or let it be killed by Mr. Yo's TC, and the scouts not really finding anything. And Mr. Yo in quite some trouble here. The Viper then continues to go for more and more scouts, even squeezes in wheelbarrow, tries to find more engagements, and just look at that. We had 15-20 in the game, and I said Mongols should have more resources, but because of the big wall base here of Mr. Yo, we actually see the Viper already a solid plus 300 here, maybe even a bit more, 350 resources there, and he's investing into those because he is sending spearmen forward, went for forging, went for bloodlines, and now has a pretty scary army here, as we can see. And Mr. Yo can't really engage into this one. We'll lose another villager at the left hand side. Forging spearmen against non-forging spearmen. Bloodlines in the big fight there as well. Forging only finishes now. And Viper with full control continues to go for the aggression. Will find more villager kills. And Mr. Yo with his big wall simply not getting onto the army that he wants to. Castle Timing flying in for the Viper. And now jumping to the end already, because the Viper adding 3 TCs is going for full knights, is trying to break in. Viper tries to keep this one open, the villager being sent, but the light cav at the perfect spot here, blocking this one off, and Mr. Yo realizes, okay, those knights are getting in. I'm a solid 84 seconds away from even reaching Castle Age, then some time for the camel defense, and Mr. Yo even wanted to switch into Mango Dye. Pretty crazy. And that's mainly because the Viper's economy was just so much smoother. Went for the farms, had the berries, had the deer, while Mr. Yo, still some deer unused next to the mill. Pretty surprising to me, couldn't really use his scout here, was a bit distracted. And I think open or walled his base a bit too big. The Viper takes pretty clean game 1, and that should say quarterfinals. And for game 2 it says quarterfinals, and this was a really strategic game here. And we can see the Viper playing Vikings against Mr. Yo playing Britons. Obviously on a map with that much water you feel like Vikings should be pretty good, but as we all know, lots of buffaloes here, so Britons typically fly to Castle Age, have a pretty solid economy here, and yeah. So good option here to go for Britons, and we have seen it multiple times. The Viper played a pretty atypical approach, actually him being the one going for the Drush against the early dock of our Briton player. Delayed dock there, and Mr. Yo with the way earlier timing to Feudal Age, and try to follow this one up with an aggressive tower. The Viper had to defend this one early. Archer range here in the center of the map as well. Fire galley dominating the field. Viper could not do much. The galley was completely wasted as well. But Viper with a nice defensive tower is easily defending this one. The archers can't really help. Too close to the town center. And Mr. Yo, well, has to find a different angle to attack. Viper with a pretty uncontested, pretty easy defense, but Mr. Yo indeed is finding a different angle to attack, and Viper feels like, okay, that's not really the gold that I can defend right now. So he moves over and is claiming that gold for himself, the one at the front. Feels like, okay, I need to take back water though. And he is indeed doing that because he is redocking. And then obviously longboats, a pretty sweet unit. Tries to use the dock here at the end, archers around, and Viper in the end actually takes a pretty good hit here for himself and only leaves one archer alive to tell the story and is going for longboats. Now Mr. Yo still trying to get some map control, but was not easy. Now we see Botkin as well, some knights being mixed in, and Miseo behind this. Adding 2 town centers while Viper has to play 1 town center. Not a great food economy for him. Goes for the monastery, and it's all longbow micro from here on. Obviously normal fire galley can't do much. Archers around, and that villager being stopped tower won't go up. And Viper gets some control, but still has to invest quite a bit. Economy not that pretty compared to Mr. Yo's, who will have quite an economy advantage going into the mid game. Game stabilized quite a bit here, castle versus castle. At least that was the plan of Mr. Yo. But that one is too close to the shore, my friend. And those longboats are finding some kills. And Mr. Yo has to think better of it, has to build his castle somewhere else. Viper gets some nice control over the center area simply because he has so much water control. Is 3 villages ahead, mainly due to Mr. Yo having lots and lots of idle TC time. 2 town centers against the 3. Farm economy not really there, and Mr. Yo has to build his castle a bit more defensively. Viper still loves to micro his longboats, and now we are getting closer to Imperial Age. And that means trap war coming, and that means more castles is better for trap production. But another really aggressive one here, and longboat still on the sea. Yeah, we have some fires now popping, but Viper obviously loves to micro those longboats and finds the perfect spot here between the castle and the barracks. Squeezes in there, the galleys or the fires can't really take the good engagement that they want to. A bit distracted there with the fishing ship as well, and Mr. Yo loses so many villagers, as we can see on a water map. 25 to 8 KD, and more villages are going to fall. Not the pretty scenario there for Mr. Yo. Castle goes up eventually, but obviously economy pretty hurt after that for Mr. Yo. But we're still going into the trap war. Obviously Warwolf now coming in as well, so that's really nice. Splash damage there for the traps and the great accuracy, but longboats so good at sniping those, and that is really costly for Mr. Yo. The Viper's economy really low as well though, as you can see, 13 on food only, so cannot afford elite longboats for quite some time. Economy is kind of stabilized. We have some harassments here at the side, but no major things. It just feels like water, the dominating thing in this game. And we can see more and more traps coming, and Viper, he's struggling with this. Longboats can't really do too much. The rams are coming in, yeah, I can see that. And longboats don't really want to go into the castle. Traps not really an option because the traps of Britain is obviously so much better. But Viper, he thinks of one thing, and those are those demos. Let's take a look how good the connection is going to be. Longboats coming in at the same time as well. Traps pretty exposed and good connections there. One trap going down, lots of the fires being hurt, and Viper happy to snipe down some more traps here, and feels like that was buying him quite some time. But population got pretty even. We have Mr. Yo expanding to the sides. Relics 2 for the Viper, 0 for Mr. Yo. Had that one under his control. The 2 on the left hand side not used at all, and Mr. Yo trying to go for more and more water control. The Viper even thinks, okay, we don't actually have any land fight. Let's use my army to raid a bit. But obviously the big story is still in the center here. And all of a sudden, Mr. Yo, with all his galleons and with his traps, able to get some control. And he is gaining control here with the gold, while Viper has to give up quite some area population. Well, still not super pretty for Mr. Yo, but he's continued to produce galleons. Now on gold. So can easily go for 10 more. Berserks completely wasted here. Rams moving forward. Now goes in with his long boats again. Over here runs into the castle, lots of losses, but trap count reduced quite heavily. As you can see, at least 2 dying here, but lots of losses on Viper's side as well. The rest is staying alive, at least those 2 out of 5 from earlier, and Viper is retreating. But as we can see, Mr. Yo setting himself up quite nicely for the comeback. Did do the defensive towers. And now the big question is who gets more control of the gold, and in the end it was simply impossible for Mr. Yo to gather enough gold, and the longboats, just such a good unit, the micro potential there, rams are added as well, and Mr. Yo simply couldn't get to the economy, couldn't get to gold to get more stuff rolling for himself. The raids were continuing, and a really strategic game, one of the best mixed water games we have seen in quite some time. But Viper with Vikings and the longboats taking game 2 for himself. Game 3 on Atacama, Mr. Yo's home map, and we see Japanese, obviously pretty strong in Atacama, cheaper mills, mining camps, lumber camps, the dock a bit more efficient as well. Mr. Yo actually went for Goth, an interesting pick, and goes for the early lane. Obviously we get Loom basically for free, or at least in no time, and therefore you can go for some wild strategies, and that's indeed what Mr. Yo did, and try to make life hell for the Viper. Goes for the lame here, walled in that villager quite nicely. The boar was taken quite early by Mr. Yo, and pretty interesting move here is that Yo actually kills the boar with his scout. Typically if you kill the villager, obviously the 340 food will still be here, rot away, but if you do the last hit with the scout, it loses all its food, and nice move by Mr. Yo, nice awareness there. Also going to lame some more of those deer here at the side, get some more control, and Mr. Yo really annoying. We also had some fight with 2 sheep going back and forth, but I think in the end all pretty neutral resources, although this looks like Mr. Yo actually might have stolen 2 sheep. Tricky scenario, tough to judge for me. Mill, something I would have loved to see walled in. Mr. Yo did not go for that, but that was because his focus was on the bottom pond and trying to wall, or trying to contest that one here. Try to not give Japanese their crazy fish advantage. Then we can see both players on the way to feudal age, slightly faster for Mr. Yo due to all this harassment. Heavily goes on to food here, and Viper plays a man-at-arm opening, as we can see. Woodline here at the front for Mr. Yo and for the Viper. But the Viper finds a pretty beautiful spot for a tower here at the front. Man-at-arms to rest this area, and Mr. Yo is struggling quite a bit with this one obviously being pushed away. And your lumber camp costs 100 wood compared to the 50 of your opponent. Man-at-arms now coming over here, and Mr. Yo not really knowing what to do to address this. Obviously full HP scout, 2 men-at-arms. Not unlikely that you will lose 2 villagers trying to get to the top, so he decided to build a counter tower, but actually in a weird range here, so villagers cannot be hit, plus the wood line is still harassable. Maybe a tower over here could have been a better option. Meanwhile, water nicely won by Mr. Yo, but obviously fish is running dry pretty soon. You only have 4 deep fish, 3 shore fish per single pond. Going into midfield age, we see quite some harassment here. Archers men-at-arms at the left-hand side has to be addressed by Mr. Yo, and that is indeed the timing where the Viper is coming over and finds some more villager kills. Some harassment here, also perfect positioning. Scouts and men-at-arms fighting off against the skirmishers, while skirmishers of the Viper are focusing down the archers. 2 villager kills here, big W for the Viper. Tries to go for a pond at the left-hand side. Mr. Yo, the one at the top. Also, that is kind of an indicator how the game is going. 4 archers on a hill against 3 archers of the Viper, and you will simply see how perfectly the Viper is microing this one. Finds 2 kills already, gets a 3rd kill. Remember, 3 against 4, and the Viper wins this one simply because he had better movement, while also harassing the berries here. Just full control, gets pawn 3 for himself as well. Double archer range setup against only 1 archer range. Mr. Yo's economy absolutely in shambles, tries to use the market, was massively floating wood and gold, is trying to get some towers up, but as we can see, the Viper, he can live with not doing too much more damage in Fuel Age because he's thinking about castling this one, and that's indeed what happened after that. Double stable for the Viper, still got more crossbows, is putting the knights out on the field and got a pretty dominant victory there. All the laming of Mr. Yo in the end didn't really pay off. The Viper simply had a civilization that could compensate with that quite nicely, had the nice food economy, could go on to berries as well. And after that, the mass pawns play really worked out. And that tower just was so good for the Viper. Yo pushed away from the center wood line. This one raided over and over again. And Atacama, just a wild map where it's basically impossible to defend all angles. The Viper, in a crazy performance, 3-0, kind of dominates Mr. Yo. Game 2 was close, but 1 and 3 felt a bit like an outclass. And we are going to see the semifinals and finals tomorrow. Back on YouTube. Goodbye. Hippo lovers, see you tomorrow.